Imagine standing in a penthouse filled with the world's most powerful people. The richest man in the room decides to humiliate an old, quiet janitor mopping the floor. The crowd laughs. But what they don't know is that the janitor isn't just cleaning. He's the only one who realizes a silent, coordinated attack on the building has already begun. And when the music stops and the doors lock, that janitor will be the only thing keeping them alive. Listen closely. You missed a spot. The voice cut clean through the low hum of polished conversations and clinking crystal, sharp enough to turn heads, without ever raising in volume. Ethan Caldwell didn't look down when he said it. Not at first. He stood beneath a chandelier that spilled warm light across tailored suits and evening gowns, a glass of amber liquor resting effortlessly between his fingers. The picture of control, of wealth, that didn't need to prove itself. Around him, the rooftop ballroom stretched wide over the Manhattan skyline, floor-to-ceiling windows framing a city that pulsed in quiet obedience below. The kind of place where every detail was curated, every guest selected, every surface expected to reflect perfection. And right now, that perfection had a smudge. The janitor stood a few feet away, mop in hand. A gray uniform pressed, but worn at the edges, the fabric softened by years of use. He didn't react immediately. His movements were steady, deliberate. The slow glide of the mop across marble almost rhythmic, as if the noise of the room simply didn't reach him. A few guests noticed. A woman in a silver dress paused mid-sentence. A young analyst near the bar leaned slightly forward, sensing the shift in tone the way people do before something breaks the surface. Caldwell finally turned his head, his eyes settling on the older man with a faint, amused tilt, the kind reserved for inconveniences that weren't worth real irritation. I said, "You missed a spot," he repeated, this time with just enough emphasis to draw a ripple of quiet laughter from the nearest circle. The janitor stopped. Not abruptly, not defensively, just stopped. He lifted his gaze, calm and level, pale blue eyes, catching the light for a fraction of a second, before settling on Caldwell with a stillness that didn't quite match the room. There was no apology in his expression, no confusion, just attention, the kind that measured rather than reacted. Caldwell smirked, misreading it instantly. "You people always do that," he added, gesturing lazily with his glass toward the floor. "Half the job, then act like no one notices." Another soft laugh, the kind people give when they're not sure if they should, but don't want to be the one who doesn't. The janitor gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, and adjusted his grip on the handle. His hands were steady, stronger than they should have been at his age. He stepped forward and dragged the mop across the exact place Caldwell had indicated. The motion smooth, precise, not rushed. The marble reflected it all back. Light, movement, the outline of a man who didn't belong in a room like this. But he wasn't looking at the floor anymore. His eyes moved once, briefly, across the room. Not wandering. Tracking. Entrances. Exits. The spacing between people. The way security lingered near the elevator bank, without quite watching anything. It lasted less than a second. Then he looked down again, as if nothing had happened at all. Caldwell took a sip, satisfied, already turning back to his guests. "Unbelievable," he murmured, just loud enough to be heard. "You build something worth billions, and this is what you still have to deal with." The janitor said nothing. The mop moved again, slow and even, the faint sound of damp fibers against stone barely audible beneath the music. But the air had shifted. Subtle, almost invisible. The kind of shift most people would never notice. The kind that only mattered if you knew what to look for. And he did. The music resumed its quiet rhythm, a soft blend of piano and low conversation. But the balance in the room had already shifted, subtle enough that most would never name it, yet present in the way voices dropped half a tone and glances lingered a second too long. Daniel Hayes continued his work without hurry, guiding the mop along the marble with the same measured precision. Each stroke clean, controlled, as if the task itself demanded respect regardless of who was watching. Up close, the details told a different story than the uniform suggested. The cuffs of his sleeves were worn, yes, but carefully maintained. His shoes were old, but polished to a muted shine. Nothing careless, nothing neglected. A young man near the security station noticed it first, though he could not say why. Liam Carter had been standing near the elevator bank, one hand resting near his radio, eyes scanning out of habit more than concern. He had worked enough events to recognize patterns, to read posture, to feel when something did not align. The janitor did not fit, not because he was out of place, but because he was too composed within it. His gaze flicked once more across the room, catching the briefest moment where Daniel's eyes lifted again, not to the floor this time, but toward the reflection in the glass wall, using it to see behind him without turning. Liam frowned slightly. That was not normal. That was training. Across the room, Caldwell laughed again, louder now, pulling attention back to himself as he recounted a story about acquisition deals and private jets, his voice carrying the easy confidence of someone who had never been ignored a day in his life. You know what the problem is? He said, swirling the drink in his glass. People forget their place. They start thinking effort equals value. A few heads nodded. A few smiled. Daniel reached the edge of the polished floor and paused, resting the mop lightly against the bucket. For a moment, he did not move at all. The city lights reflected in the glass behind him, stretching endless and distant. But his focus was not on the view. It was on the room, on the rhythm, on the unseen details that most people never notice until it was too late. Then, just as quietly, he bent down and adjusted the position of the bucket by a few inches, aligning it with the edge of the marble as if it mattered. As if everything did. Liam felt it then, a small, tightening awareness in his chest. Not fear. Not yet. Just the unmistakable sense that the man everyone saw as invisible was the only one truly paying attention. And that meant something was about to happen. The glass walls caught the city in fragments now, reflections layering over movement until it became difficult to tell what was real and what was only light bending across polished surfaces. Daniel straightened slowly, one hand resting lightly on the handle of the mop, his posture relaxed but deliberate, like a man who never wasted motion. Across the room, Ethan Caldwell had gathered a wider circle, his voice rising just enough to dominate the space without seeming to try, every word calibrated to remind the room who built it, who owned it, who mattered. You want to know the difference, Caldwell said, glancing briefly toward Daniel as if he were part of the demonstration, between people who run the world and people who clean up after it. A few guests shifted, sensing the edge in the comment, but no one interrupted. Caldwell stepped closer, closing the distance by a few feet, the soft leather of his shoes barely making a sound on the marble. It is not opportunity, he continued, lifting his glass slightly. It is mindset. Some people are built to lead. Others, he let the sentence hang, his gaze settling fully on Daniel now, inviting the room to follow it. Others are comfortable staying exactly where they belong. The silence that followed was thin and stretched, the kind that made people glance at each other without moving their heads. Daniel did not respond. He did not look away either. He simply met Caldwell's eyes for a brief moment. Not challenging, not submissive, just present. Then he lowered his gaze again and reached for the bucket. The motion was smooth, controlled, almost precise enough to feel intentional beyond the task itself. Liam felt his grip tighten slightly on the edge of the security console. Something about that exchange did not resolve the way it should have. Most people, when placed under that kind of attention, reacted. They apologized, they hurried, they avoided eye contact. Daniel had done none of that. He had acknowledged, then returned to his work as if the words had no weight to carry. Caldwell exhaled through his nose, a faint hint of irritation breaking through his composed exterior. Subtle but visible if you knew where to look. He took another sip, then gestured lightly toward the floor again, as if correcting an unfinished detail. Daniel stepped forward without hesitation. But this time, as he moved, his eyes lifted once more, scanning not the man in front of him, but the room behind him. Measuring distance, timing, alignment, the quiet math of awareness running beneath the surface. And Liam understood then, with a clarity that settled deep and steady, that whatever Caldwell thought he was controlling in that moment, he was not the one setting the terms. A server passed by with a silver tray, the soft clink of glass barely audible beneath the steady rhythm of conversation. But Daniel noticed the hesitation in the man's step, the fraction of a second where his balance shifted just enough to suggest distraction, not clumsiness. It was small, almost nothing, but small things were where problems began. Daniel adjusted his path by half a step, guiding the mop in a clean arc that kept the walkway clear, his movements blending into the background so seamlessly that no one registered the correction. No one except Liam. From across the room, Liam's eyes narrowed slightly, tracking the motion, replaying it in his mind the way trained instincts demanded. That was not reactive. That was anticipatory. Caldwell, unaware, continued, his voice rising again as he leaned into the attention. You see it everywhere, he said, gesturing loosely toward the staff moving along the edges of the room. People doing just enough to get by. No vision. No discipline. No real understanding of what it takes to operate at the highest level. He smiled. The expression polished, controlled, practiced. That is why there are levels to everything. A few guests nodded again, more confidently this time, drawn back into the comfort of agreement. Daniel stopped near the edge of the bar, setting the mop against the bucket with careful precision, aligning it so it would not obstruct the narrow service path. His hands lingered for a moment on the handle, fingers resting lightly, as if feeling something others could not. Then, quietly, he spoke. Levels depend on what you are trained to see. His voice was low, steady, not loud enough to command the room, but clear enough that those closest heard it without effort. The words settled differently than Caldwell's had. There was no performance in them. No need for approval. Just fact. Caldwell turned slowly, the smile fading by a degree, replaced with something thinner, sharper. Is that right? He said, taking a step closer, curiosity edged with irritation. Daniel met his gaze again, calm and unchanged. Most people only see what is in front of them. He continued, his tone even. They miss what is around it. The room quieted. Not completely, but enough that the shift could be felt. Liam's hand moved to his radio without conscious thought, his attention fully locked now. Because whatever this was becoming, it was no longer just a conversation. And Daniel Hayes was no longer invisible. For a brief second, no one spoke. The kind of silence that does not belong in a room built on constant noise and controlled conversation settled in. Thin, but undeniable. Ethan Caldwell studied Daniel now with a different kind of attention. Not dismissive anymore, but measuring, as if trying to place him into a category that made sense. You talk like you think you understand this world, Caldwell said finally, his tone quieter, but edged with something colder. You mop floors in it. A few guests shifted again. The tension no longer amusing, no longer safe. Daniel did not react to the jab. His posture remained steady. Shoulders relaxed. Eyes level. Every system looks simple, he said, his voice calm. Until something stops working. The words were plain, almost understated, but they landed with a weight that did not match their volume. Liam felt it again. That tightening awareness. Sharper now, more focused. His gaze moved instinctively toward the security panel near the wall, a bank of small indicator lights that monitored access points, elevators, and internal systems. Everything looked normal. Green across the board. Still, something did not feel right. Across the room, Caldwell let out a short breath, half laugh, half dismissal. Nothing here stops working, he replied, gesturing lightly around the space. That is the whole point. Daniel's eyes shifted, just slightly, not toward Caldwell, but past him, toward the reflection in the glass again. That is what people say, he answered. And then, almost on cue, one of the lights on the security panel flickered. It was subtle, a brief pulse from green to amber and back again. So quick most would have missed it entirely. But Liam saw it. His hand moved instantly to the console, fingers hovering as he leaned in closer. Another flicker, this time longer. Not a failure. Not yet. But not normal either. The music continued. The conversations resumed in small pockets, unaware. Caldwell had already turned slightly, losing interest, ready to reclaim the room. But Daniel had not moved. His gaze remained fixed on the reflection, tracking something no one else could see directly. The timing, the sequence, the pattern. And in that moment, Liam understood with absolute clarity that whatever was about to happen had already started. And Daniel Hayes had seen it before anyone else. Liam leaned closer to the panel, his eyes scanning the indicators with a precision that came from repetition, from long hours of watching systems that were designed not to fail. The amber flicker returned, this time holding for nearly 2 full seconds before snapping back to green. That was not a glitch. That was a signal. He tapped the console lightly, pulling up a secondary display, the interface responding with clean, confident lines of data that insisted everything was functioning exactly as intended. But the timing did not match. The rhythm was wrong. Across the room, Daniel shifted his weight, one hand resting casually against the handle of the mop, but his attention was no longer on the floor. His eyes tracked the reflection again, following the pattern as it repeated. Subtle but consistent, like a heartbeat just slightly out of sync. He stepped away from the bucket without drawing attention, moving along the edge of the room with the same quiet presence that had made him invisible minutes earlier. Except now, Liam was watching. "Hold on," Liam muttered under his breath, lifting his radio slightly. Not transmitting yet, just preparing. He glanced toward the elevator bank, then back to the panel. Another flicker. This time, a second light echoed it, offset by less than a second. That was coordination. That meant something external was influencing the system, not enough to trigger an alarm, but enough to test the response. Caldwell's voice rose again behind them. Steady, confident, pulling laughter back into the space as if nothing could disrupt the flow he controlled. But Daniel was already ahead of it. He stopped near the service corridor entrance, his gaze moving once across the ceiling line, then down toward the access point keypad. "You are watching the wrong thing," he said quietly, not looking at Liam, but speaking just loud enough to reach him. Liam turned, startled, his focus snapping from the panel to the older man. "What?" he asked, instinctively lowering his voice. Daniel's expression did not change. "The system is not failing," he continued. "It is being tested." The words settled hard. Immediate, cutting through the noise around them. Liam felt it land. Not as theory, but as recognition. Because the pattern on the panel was not random. It was deliberate. And if someone was testing the system, it meant they were planning something bigger than a flicker of light. Liam's mind moved fast now. Faster than the system in front of him. Faster than the clean green lights that insisted everything was under control. Testing meant probing. Probing meant mapping weaknesses. And mapping weaknesses meant intent. He swallowed once, steadying himself, then brought the radio closer to his mouth, thumb hovering over the transmit button. "Control, this is Carter," he said quietly, keeping his tone level. "I need a silent check on internal access logs for the last 5 minutes. No alerts, just confirmation." A pause. Static. Then a calm voice answered, routine and unaware. "Copy that. Stand by." Across from him, Daniel had already shifted position again, placing himself where he could see both the service corridor and the main floor without turning his head. His posture remained relaxed, but there was nothing passive about it now. His eyes tracked movement the way a seasoned driver reads traffic. Not reacting, but predicting. Caldwell's laughter rose again behind them, louder this time, pulling attention back toward the center of the room. He was telling another story, something about leverage and timing, his voice carrying the easy certainty of a man who believed he controlled outcomes simply by deciding them. But the rhythm beneath that confidence was breaking. Liam saw it in the panel. Another flicker. Then 2 more, staggered. Not random. Sequential. He felt a cold clarity settle in. "That is a sweep," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Daniel's voice came again. Low. Precise. "They are checking response time," he said. Liam looked at him sharply. "Who is?" Daniel did not answer directly. His gaze lifted slightly toward the ceiling, following a line most would never notice. "Someone who expects no resistance," he said instead. The words carried a quiet certainty that made Liam's grip tighten on the radio. A soft chime sounded from the console. "Control again. Carter, we are seeing minor access pings across 3 points. Nothing triggered. Probably system drift." Liam exhaled slowly. System drift. That was what it looked like. That was what it was supposed to look like. He glanced back at Daniel, who had not moved, not reacted, just watched. And in that stillness, Liam understood something that made the room feel smaller, tighter, more fragile than it had a moment ago. This was not drift. This was a rehearsal. And rehearsals always came before something real. The air in the room had not changed for most people, not in any way they could name. But Liam could feel it now. A pressure building just beneath the surface. Quiet and controlled, like something waiting for a signal. His eyes stayed locked on the panel, tracking the pattern as it evolved. No longer subtle. No longer random. 3 points. Then 4. Each one lighting up in sequence, testing pathways, measuring delay, confirming access. Control, Liam said again into the radio, this time more firm. I need a deeper scan on those access points. Cross-check against external signals. Do not assume internal drift. The response came slower this time. Copy running expanded diagnostics. That hesitation said enough. They were not seeing it yet, or they did not want to. Daniel moved again, one step closer to the corridor, his position now deliberate, no longer incidental. He was not cleaning anymore. The mop stood still beside him, forgotten, or perhaps placed exactly where it needed to be. His gaze lifted toward the glass wall, using the reflection to track movement across the room without drawing attention. Guests still talked, laughed. Waiters moved between them carrying trays. Caldwell stood at the center, unaware, still commanding the room with confidence that had not yet been challenged. But Daniel was not watching him anymore. He was watching the timing. It is about to shift, Daniel said quietly. Liam turned sharply. What is? He asked, tension tightening in his voice. Daniel did not look at him. The test ends when they get an answer, he replied. And then, it happened. The panel did not flicker this time. It held. One light turned amber. Then another. Then all 3 points stayed lit at once, steady, deliberate. No return to green. No correction. Liam's breath slowed, controlled, but his mind sharpened instantly. Control, confirm status now, he said, voice low but urgent. Silence answered for half a second too long. Then, finally, we are seeing the same. Systems are not responding as expected. Not failing. Not yet. But no longer normal. Liam looked at Daniel, and for the first time, there was no doubt left. Whatever was happening, it had moved past testing. And Daniel Hayes had already been waiting for this exact moment. The shift did not come with noise. It came with absence. The music cut out mid-note. Not fading. Not glitching. Simply gone. Leaving a hollow quiet that felt heavier than any sound. Conversations stumbled and collapsed into confusion as guests turned toward the nearest speaker, toward each other, toward anything that could explain the sudden break in rhythm. The lights did not go out, but they dimmed just enough to change the room from warm to uncertain. Liam's hand tightened around the radio, his voice steady but firm. Control, we have a full system disruption. Initiate lockdown protocol. No answer. Just static. That was the answer. Across the room, Ethan Caldwell finally paused, his expression shifting for the first time from control to irritation, then to something sharper as he realized this was not a minor inconvenience. What is going on? He demanded, his voice cutting through the confusion. But no one responded with certainty. Staff looked at each other. Security hesitated. The system that was supposed to guide them was no longer giving direction. Daniel moved. Not quickly, not dramatically, just with purpose. He stepped past Liam, closing the distance to the access corridor, his hand brushing lightly against the keypad. Not pressing, not forcing, just confirming something only he seemed to understand. They are inside the system, he said calmly. Liam followed, his focus locked. Who? Daniel's eyes lifted once more to the reflection in the glass, tracking the unseen. People who planned for no resistance, he answered. Then he turned. Not to the panel, not to the corridor, but to the room. His voice did not rise, but it carried. Everyone stay where you are, he said, steady and controlled. And something in the tone made people listen. Movement slowed. Voices dropped. Even Caldwell stopped speaking. For a moment, the entire room held still, suspended between uncertainty and instinct. Liam felt it then, clear and undeniable. The authority in that moment did not belong to the man who owned the building. It belonged to the man who had been watching all along. Caldwell took a step forward, his confidence trying to reassert itself. You do not give orders here, he said, sharper now. Daniel met his gaze. Calm, unshaken. Right now, he replied quietly. I am the only one who understands what